Good evening. I'm Councillor Zoe Baker. I'm the Mayor of North Sydney, and I'm very pleased to welcome you here to this Economic Development Community Forum this evening. Before we begin, I acknowledge that we are here meeting on lands of the Cammeraygal people of the Eora Nation. I acknowledge the traditional custodians and pay my respect and gratitude for their careful custodianship of these lands, skies and waters for over 65,000 years. And I extend that respect to elders past, present and emerging, and to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us from whichever country you're on tonight. A small housekeeping item before we begin. If you wish to improve the visual quality of the live stream, there is a toggle on the right-hand side of the YouTube screen, and that allows you to adjust it. I'm here also to thank you, all of the panel members who you will be meeting tonight, and shortly Alison McCabe from the Planning Studio will facilitate a discussion and introduce you to them. But before we do that, tonight's event is the third in a series of forums and part of a much broader community engagement program that aims the Council to understand what the North Sydney community would like to see in the next 10 years. Council is asking everyone to let us know your needs, your priorities and aspirations for the next decade. This is a real partnership between the Council and our community, and decisions have not yet been made. Your feedback will in fact direct and shape the plans to come. Public participation plays a vital role in fostering sustainable communities, and so does economic development. Economic development creates employment, it provides essential goods and services, and it helps to create attractive places to live, work, learn and visit. More broadly, a strong economy generates funding to contribute to public services. The stronger our economy, the stronger our public services. Council recognises the value of economic development as a cornerstone for encouraging investment, creating employment opportunities and building a vibrant commercial hubs in the North Sydney local government area. As part of the Eastern Economic Corridor, North Sydney stands alongside the City of Sydney as a key driver of economic growth in this state. This economic corridor, which runs from Macquarie Park through the CBD to the airport, is regarded as the state's greatest, if not the nation's greatest economic asset. We need to delve deeper into what this means for North Sydney and how we can maximise this unique position. Our local government area boasts a robust health district, and we have the most dense education precinct in the country. Both of these are significant opportunities to drive economic growth and vitality of our community. Our iconic harbour location, with access within minutes to urban bushland, is also a significant strength. We need, as a community, to lean into the cultural and creative potential our location offers and what this means for economic growth into the future. And of course, we can't talk about economic growth without thinking about what the metro is going to mean for our local government area. The Victoria Cross and Crows Nest metro stations will shortly open, and they are an obvious huge opportunity for our local government area. The psychological barrier of the Harbour Bridge will be significantly reduced, and it will better connect us with the rest of the city and unlock significant economic potential. The Economic Development Discussion Paper, which you can access online, asks us to consider these themes and what we need to do as a community to help create a thriving and sustainable economic future for North Sydney. For example, it asks how can we lift up our villages and commercial centres to better support our local economy and to build stronger communities? What do we need to do to help existing businesses thrive as well as attract new ones? How can we enhance our evening and nighttime economy to make North Sydney a more vibrant place to live, work and visit? The perennial question of how do we enliven the North Sydney CBD, particularly after dark? Tonight's panel will be tackling these questions and more as our experts share their evidence-based insights on the future of our economic development in North Sydney. And before I hand over to April, I'd encourage you once again to please have your say via the online surveys. After tonight's forum, start with the economic development page and work through the rest of the themes. Be inspired by the panel and be ambitious and aspirational in your thinking and feedback about the next 10 years. Please also spread the word through your networks. I challenge you to find 3 of your neighbours, friends and colleagues and ask them also to fill out some of our online surveys. The more and more diverse views who engage in this community engagement that we're undertaking, the better. So thank you all again for being here this evening to be a part of this important discussion, and I'm pleased to hand over to April McCabe, who will introduce the panellists to you. Thank you.
Good evening and welcome to tonight's discussion. My name is April McCabe. I'm the director of the Planning Studio, and I've got the great pleasure of moderating and guiding tonight's discussion on what is a really important topic. I'd just like to also acknowledge that for the economic development study that the Mayor has just spoken about, I want to acknowledge SGS Economics and Planning, who we're partnering with and who are crunching the numbers and doing a lot of the data and the background work on for this particular piece of work. Economic development is one of those things that when we think about local government, we don't really think about what their role is in economic development. A lot of people have that very traditional notion that local government's role is about rates, roads and rubbish. But I think that the community's expectation and about the role of council has evolved, and also too that relationship with business is such an important partnership to ensure that all those social, economic, environmental and cultural benefits can be realised as well. A lot of the work that we do around the social, the environmental, the cultural life of this city also has an economic benefit to it. There's also, as the Mayor sort of talked about, I think there's various parts to the local economy. It's not just focused on jobs, businesses. It's also how we provide services to our people, how we learn, those lifelong learning opportunities. I'm really excited tonight that we have a panel of experts to join me on this discussion to really explore what does economic development mean in the local government context, and for them to use and to share with you all tonight their experience and expertise as we explore, as the Mayor has already kind of highlighted, those various and broad themes that fall under this idea of economic development. Just in terms of logistics, there is a QR code on your screen. That QR code links to Slido. So towards the end of tonight's session, there will be opportunities for the panel to be thrown your questions. So please feel free to pop your questions via the Slido there using the QR code, and hopefully we'll get to some of those. Potentially we won't get to all of them tonight, but we'll certainly attempt to get to as many as we can. I think that one of the things I just want to reiterate before I sort of get our panellists to introduce themselves is those 4 themes that economic development in the context of North Sydney is being built around for the study and the eventual strategy. And those 4 themes for North Sydney are about vibrant commercial centres and villages. And it's recognising that North Sydney CBD, while probably seen as the centre, that there is a number of local villages and centres that form an ecosystem for this LGA, and making sure that we balance the needs of those with all the other centres as well, and how they work together within a network is really important. It's about that thriving business the environment as well. How can we help existing, but how can we also attract new businesses, not only to the North Sydney CBD, but also to those villages around the LGA. As the Mayor said, we are sitting in a really beautiful part of Sydney that has some really amazing attributes for visitors, not only from overseas, but also domestic as well. So how do we encourage them to maybe make that trip over the Harbour Bridge and come over and enjoy what North Sydney has to offer, but also to recognising that as a really strong sort of business environment that already exists here, there's a lot of day visitors that are coming to North Sydney, whether it's to the health precincts, whether it's to the education. And so how do we actually get them to stay and enjoy what North Sydney has to offer? And then finally, I think is a more broader question that I'm really, I think that all of us are grappling with at the moment is how do we make our local economy more resilient? And that whether it be to social impacts, whether that's environmental impacts. We saw recently, more in the recent past, the impact on business and COVID, and how do we make that more resilient? And that's a really important role that council needs to play in terms of with business and other levels of government. So a broad thing to cover tonight, and I'm really excited about the discussion that we're about to have. So I'm going to hand over to Jeremy, and I'll start with the end of the panel there and get you to introduce yourself. And as you're introducing yourself as well, based on your experience, what do you see as the important role that local government plays within the economic development of a local area?
Thanks, April. Hello, everyone. So my name is Jeremy Gill. I am the Head of Policy at the Committee for Sydney. Economic development for councils, I think, is often defined as much by what they can't do as what they can do. Councils can't force a business to move into the area. They can't force a business to stay in the area. They can't decide that there's too many pharmacists in a high street and to not have any more, or the fact that they'd love to have a cluster of Japanese restaurants in this place because it would be great. They can't do a lot of those things that we see as residents walking down our street that make local centres great. What they can do is set a vision for a place, be it a centre like North Sydney or Crow's Nest or Cremorne. They can work with businesses to understand their needs, what their barriers are, what their opportunities are that they see for their local business community. They can advocate on the behalf of businesses and of places to state government, maybe for funding or investment. They can use their own facilities, council chambers, libraries, community facilities, to drive activity, maybe be homes for startups, and we're seeing that a lot with libraries changing from books to startup spaces and computers. They can also use their own power of procurement to invest in local businesses and to let them grow, and to invest in their streetscape upgrades so that their places have a particular identity. They can do lots of things like that, but one of the challenges they have is they can't force a business to stay or grow.
And I think that's one of the challenges that people see about that sort of the more planning side of things, but there's so much other things. So I'm excited to explore that. We also have Victoria Moxey, so really excited to have you on. I know the Mayor talked a lot about 24 hours, so great to have you on. If you want to introduce yourself, and same question.
Great, thanks April, and hello everyone. Lovely to be here, and thank you for being invited. I'm Victoria Moxey. I'm the Director of Programs at the Office of the 24-Hour Economic Commissioner. Very long name, colloquially known as Team 24. I've been with the office for a year and a half now, but prior to that I was at the City of Sydney heading the City Business team as part of the Economic Development operational team at the City. So plenty to bring to the table. And I think, you gave Jeremy a really good summary, especially about what, council cannot do. Not only keeping businesses, but actually also keeping visitors entertained. But I think, focusing on that, what council can do, I think from the experience of working in council, there's such an opportunity of enabling that environment of community, especially an entrepreneurial culture and community, and making that part of the DNA of North Sydney. I think that could be a really powerful attractor, not only for entrepreneurs and small business owners, but also for workers and for students. That identity that is part of the council's engagement at local level and street level with businesses and with community. And when we talk about that, is enabling space, but also initiatives that allow that connection to happen, especially across sectors, because that's where the peer-to-peer learning and the mentoring and the sharing of knowledge and the great innovations happen. So, I think, if to highlight something beyond what Jeremy touched on, I think that's a good one to focus on.
Yeah, and I think there's those similarities about it's not necessarily the doing, it's the enabling, it's the vision setting. One thing when I do a lot of social infrastructure work, I like to call collision spaces. It's that collision of ideas. So it's when you get people potentially varying interests, that sort of innovation, that's where that true innovation comes from.
Yeah, at the office we talk about the collision economy.
Oh, great.
We need to really focus on that collision economy because that's what's really accelerating innovation and the doing, across everything in the post-COVID world.
Excellent. Well, I'm very happy to have you on the panel. And last but not least, we've got Andrew Christie here, and you're a newbie to the local area. So if you can introduce yourself and maybe talk a little bit about CSU.
Sure. Hi everyone. So it's Andrew Knight.
Sorry.
It's all right. So I'm the campus director and principal of the newly opened Charles Sturt University Sydney campus in Berry Street in North Sydney. So we've been open for 3 months and have just passed our first cohort of students through their first semester. I think there's some exams running right now, in fact. And so we're very happy to be in North Sydney, and we think it's a great location, and it's really good to be a part of today's panel. You'll find us to be a very active business. I'll call us a business, but it's probably more than that in the local community. And I think as to the question of what can councils do, I think everything that's been said, but facilitation for a business like ours that probably wants to get involved in a big way. So we'll have students that want to come and work in the sort of gig economy or small business. They'll be spending money. Culturally, will be a very interesting business because we'll have a wide range of international students that don't necessarily live in North Sydney. It's a bit expensive, but who would be visiting quite a bit during work days. And so cultural kind of events, and we'll add a lot of sort of cultural difference to the LGA. So I think facilitating that plus work integrated learning is big with us. So we'll be looking for internship, placement opportunities, and also then employment. Hopefully staying on to one of the sort of tech firms or the businesses here in North Sydney CBD. Our students very much would like to roll forward that.
And I think there's a real opportunity. The Mayor talked about the density of education, particularly primary schools and high schools in here in the North Sydney LGA. Also too, that potential that some places experience that knowledge leak, that they're building that knowledge, not only their intellectual and academic knowledge, but also the knowledge of the place. And so how do we sort of potentially keep them and keep that sort of ownership and that sort of connection to place as they grow? Particularly, I think some of those international students, what are those opportunities for them to come here, experience this place and say, I might stay on. And so those skills are retained. All three of you bring a really diverse experience, and so I think it's really exciting to have you all on to have this discussion. I want to go up a level. The Mayor talked about the Global Arc, if I'm not mistaken, that's what it's called. And Jeremy, with your role at the committee there, but I know from your expertise and experience, where should the North Sydney community and where should council be really pitching North Sydney's role within that broader Sydney economy, but also potentially that New South Wales economy? We have the City of Sydney across the harbour, which we all know the contribution that they play, but I think that there's sometimes the North Sydney plays second fiddle a little bit. So what does the committee have a position on where North Sydney's role is in that broader? And from your experience, what do you think?
I think it's less about having a view of what North Sydney's specific role is in Sydney and more about recognising how does a metropolitan economy work. I think that's the important thing. Often with economic development done at a local government level, there is a focus or an emphasis on what can we do to it's called self-containment. How do we keep as many people living and working in the area? That's fine if you're in Wagga, where you don't want people driving 2 hours to somewhere else. But in a city that's connected as we are, the idea of ensuring that everyone must be in the same place and every centre should do as many different things as possible probably doesn't ring as true as it does in sort of regional areas. So I think the first thing is to recognise that North Sydney is a major employment hub in the centre, or the eastern part of Sydney, but the economic centre of gravity of Sydney. It's already well connected, but it's going to be increasingly well connected with the metro opening across the road later in the year. That basically becomes a metro line that brings to life that global economic corridor, economic arc. It's been called a number of things over the last decade or so. And what that does is connects the major employment centres of the CBD, North Sydney, Macquarie Park, even through to places like Norwest, where there's quite a number of businesses up there. So it creates the ability for businesses to work together and connect to one another and to specialise in things that they do well. They don't have to do everything the same. But it also connects those centres to the labour market of Sydney, where the businesses that tend to locate in a place like North Sydney CBD, where there's a large number of commercial buildings, it's professional services, financial services, legal services, IT, those sorts of businesses that want proximity to one another, but they also want to be as connected as they can to as many people in the labour market as possible. And that's really important because a lot of those businesses will be trying to attract the best talent they can from a city of 5 million, 6 million, 7 million in the future. So if you are connected by a metro line or heavy rail line or a light rail line, that really positions you really well to be able to draw from the biggest labour market that you can, be it students from different parts of Sydney or from overseas, but people living in the northwest who can now really easily access jobs in North Sydney. And I think that really sets North Sydney up to be a really important commercial district, more so than it is now. I think what it also does, going under the harbour, is, as the Mayor talked about, it removes that perception of separation from the CBD. If you get on at Barangaroo and you get off at Victoria Cross, it's just one metro stop. It happens to have gone under the harbour. But I think it removes that perception. So I think there's an opportunity for it to bring North Sydney and the Sydney CBD closer together. I think that would really help. There's also often price point differences. So, the Sydney CBD, particularly around the Circular Quay, is really expensive. I'm not sure what the prices are in North Sydney. They tend not to be as expensive, but that is a benefit to attracting businesses as well. Those that want to be as close to that as possible, to that large market of jobs, the 500 or so thousand in the CBD, can be one metro station away. I think the final thing so that's a lot of bringing people in and connecting to things like the research and development that's happening in Macquarie University and the Macquarie Park Innovation District. That doesn't have the critical mass of high density commercial developments that North Sydney has. But the two are now connected really closely, and so they can really partner and do what they do best in a reciprocal way. Again, that's people coming in, but I think it's also important to recognise what that sort of connectivity can do in terms of enabling places like Macquarie Park. I'm going to use Macquarie Park because it's only going to be a few stops away on the metro in the future. But if we think carefully about the future role of residential and others, we need to protect a commercial core of North Sydney, but a high density, high amenity environment like North Sydney has the ability to have more people living around it. Essential workers, affordable housing, that is actually really essential for places like the hospital at Macquarie Park or the hospitals at RPA, St Vincent's, to have the workforce they need to be able to operate as effectively as possible. And so that ability for this to be a place where people can leave, go to their jobs in a really connected way and really kind of bring together that global arc, I think is a really important role.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. Did you want to?
I was just going to say, and that's for people coming in, people with that potential of maybe working in proximity of other commercial centres. But there's also, what's happening, with the post-COVID world, the flexible working having such a huge impact on a lot of more residents working from home. So that's a huge market that is available and ready. And what we've seen through research is that the increase of openings of nighttime businesses outside of the CBD, that rate has increased a lot faster than within the city. So we talk about the decentralization of going out. So there's such an opportunity to work with this organic clustering of businesses across neighborhoods and villages and town centers, and really focus on creating unique experiences and what are those different stories that are coming from that. Because visitors are also now going where locals go.
Yeah.
So really focusing on attracting locals will also attract that visitor market.
And I think that what we've seen, over the last, 10 years or so, that share economy, whether it's the Airbnbs and that, but people are looking for the local experience. They're not looking to
Absolutely.
We still love going to Opera House and other things, but people are also coming to other cities to really feel the texture of the place. And that's that opportunity to click into as well. The point that you made about how COVID has shifted, I think that is one of the biggest economic challenges for business, particularly those sort of larger businesses that are office-based, about what does that look like? And it all of a sudden opens up this different kind of competitiveness for places, because people want to have those lifestyle experiences. For North Sydney, one of the interesting things is that you have a very high proportion of people who are living in apartments. And so, Andrew, I'm interested in the planning for the campus. What opportunities do you see in terms of potentially linking in with that, people working more from home but may not have the space, or they've got kids, or things that they need to get away from? Is there an opportunity for the university to potentially provide some of those spaces beyond the student spaces? I know I've just thrown that at you, but...
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's probably more in the cultural space, or the events that we will offer on campus. And so while it is mostly students coming in and students coming into our classrooms, it also is a community space that we would welcome other people to come in. So we will hold cultural events. We'll probably have lecture series or sort of learnings that we can share with the wider community. So it could be that particular event as well. I don't want to get down into the details, but Wi-Fi, for example, we're part of the EduRoam network, which is across all the universities. So there will be students from other campuses that come on and come up to North Sydney and get Wi-Fi through us, and so they'll come into North Sydney.
Yeah.
So that's another one. So that's probably...
Yeah, look, I think that there's real opportunities. I know, Jeremy, we've talked at length at times about this shift and this change, and what does this... I don't think we know what it means, but we're starting to see what it might sort of mean for local government. And so, Jeremy...
Yeah, I think with North Sydney, there is a tendency to think about the CBD and kind of forget that there are other smaller centres as well that are really vibrant. And I think... what those local centres, both in North Sydney and elsewhere, highlight, you talk about the impact of COVID. COVID really accelerated changes that we're already seeing happen in a lot of local centres. The move to online retail was really ramped up, accelerated through COVID. Just even prior to that, the rise of online banking and the kind of the decline of the high street bank. There were two really strong anchors, retail and banking, that kind of defined the high street of those local centres for, a century or more. And so there is a repositioning of what the role of a local centre is, not even the CBD, what the role of a local centre is for local residents, from a shopping perspective, for visitors to come to those centres for different experiences. And the centres that have been able to adapt to new uses to come in there, the ones that make sure that they've got a really strong offer that their local community needs, the ones that have sufficient people living around them to create sufficient demand for those shops to stay open and trade and be vibrant, the role that councils have often played in the reuse of their community facilities and their libraries, as I mentioned before, those that have been able to move reasonably quickly and adapt to those changing dynamics of retail banking and just and the services, I think have been the ones that have been able to thrive. And that's the risk, I think, for a lot of high streets. If they haven't been able to do that, that's where we start to see, not in North Sydney so much, this is probably a broader conversation, the decline in the high street, which is symptomatic of that change.
Yeah, and we always at the office talk about the rise of the convenience economy. So it's not only online banking and online shopping, but it's actually getting amazing entertainment at home, in your couch, which Mike, the 24-hour Economic Commissioner often talks about. All of us are fighting a war against the couch because it is about exceeding the quality of the entertainment that you can have now at home with great food and incredible movies and live music, at home. So thinking about that competitive market and understanding that precinct approach to villages and centres that is based on authentic. What is the authentic experience? Even if it's a small centre with 5 to 10 businesses, but if it's authentic and beautiful, it becomes a destination, as long as we're talking about an experience that can match or be better than what you can actually access at home.
Yeah, and what everyone at home is experiencing, great entertainment on their couch tonight. I mean, under a blanket.
This is a Netflix series, surely.
Yeah. Look, this is very entertaining, of course. So thanks everyone for joining us. I hope you're on the couch and enjoying yourself. But Victoria, really, I'm going to tap into your non-24-hour, but your City of Sydney experience. We talk a lot, and I think Jeremy raised that issue. A lot of people, when we talk about North Sydney, they automatically, their mind sits straight into the CBD. And the tall towers and the global sort of headquarters for, global businesses. And we see them on top of the buildings there as we drive through. The small business is super important to a sustainable local economy, not only for local residents and that, but also for the health of the local economy. How do we capture what they need? How do we understand? And we know that this environment's changing rapidly. How, in your experience in working with City of Sydney and a lot of the programs that you were kind of operationalising, what are some of the ways that we can effectively understand their needs?
I always love to remember that small business owners and workers are people, and they are the ones that are the connecting tissue to residents and visitors, because they are part of the ones that make the experience of whoever comes around. It's not the corporate companies, it's many times those small businesses that are on the high streets and are the ones that are the living experience of a place. So it's so important to listen to small business. When we were at the city, it's really hard to connect with small business. They're so busy, and there's very little time to not work on your business. So one of the initiatives that we launched that was really successful, especially because it was right before COVID, was a local business needs survey. And we promoted that as the main channel for council to talk to businesses and to really understand what were the priorities for small business. And of course, that became very valuable to us to respond very fast to the needs of businesses through COVID. But at the same time, it really helped shape economic programs dedicated to small business. And, funding is limited.
Yep.
From council. So how do we make sure that we are tapping into the key priorities for small businesses? A lot of that had to do with capacity building, funding, but also connections. So that connectivity of business owners with creatives, with artists, with what do we do with underutilized space that small businesses might have, and how might they be able to share with others? So there's a lot to learn by finding a way to tapping into small businesses directly.
Yeah, great, Jeremy.
I think one of the roles that government can also play, local government in particular, but state government, and even the major institutions within a local economy, universities, hospitals, is if they recognise and understand what offers the small business community provides from a supply chain, from a supplier perspective, from a service perspective, one of the best ways that they can support and nurture that is be a customer, and use procurement. I mean, procurement often just puts people to sleep. As you say, oh, I love procurement, but actually it's one of the greatest tools for economic development that a council can use, either through setting goals to use their own procurement to build the capacity in local businesses. It might be, in North Sydney, there's not that many industrial precincts around, but you might say in this area, we want to make sure that council uses the cleaning services of a local business, or that the universities or the hospitals use the dry cleaning services and the repair services of a business over in Artarmon, through to catering from local businesses that can support those opportunities. So that it's not just about picking favourites and the like, but recognising that you can actually do a lot by just choosing where to place your money as an organisation and using the critical power to say, okay, council's going to do it, but we're going to partner with the universities and the state government and the hospitals and all the schools around here to go, what can we do to kind of create also a virtuous procurement system to support that small business.
And that's a very good point, Jeremy, because it's leading by example, right? Because it's really making sure that you're setting the example of how other bigger corporates in the local area can also procure small business, and that's part of that community building. And how do you identify yourself as a council working with
and I think
industry?
It's, in terms of discussions that I've had with the social inclusion study that's also happening at the moment. I've used the example about one of the ways you feel a sense of belonging in your community is if your local barista knows who you are and knows who your coffee is, because you've gone there and you've built that. While it's not you're not going to invite the barista to your child's birthday, but you've got a relationship enough that you want to support them, and you have a vested, you're invested in their success as well. And I think the idea of people. I'm really interested, Andrew. Charles Sturt could have picked any location in Sydney, frankly. Like, there's plenty of opportunities. You potentially could have had a much bigger campus sort of out towards Western Sydney. What was it about North Sydney that attracted you? Because obviously Charles Sturt is renowned regional, sort of regionally based university. What attracted you, and what were the attributes of North Sydney that you went, this is where we want to be?
Yeah, the majority of the student body that will come to North Sydney versus a Wagga or a Dubbo is that we've mostly got international students, so it's very difficult for Charles Sturt to get students to go to regional, even though it's quite attractive for post-study work rights and extra points on visas. But the majority of international students want to come to a CBD location, and Sydney and Melbourne are the two big markets. Why North Sydney? I think there's a couple of elements, and talking about connectivity is one of them. So the metro station soon to be open, where the campus is right next door to Victoria Cross Station. So a lot of our students will live in the corridor from all the way up to the sort of Hills District down to Lakemba and Bankstown. So getting into campus is a big deal. I think there's a prestige. I was going to say it's interesting that there's a connection with the CBD, but there's also a prestige with North Sydney, the wider group. And so international students will see the businesses that are in North Sydney. And so the prestige that comes along with being in North Sydney versus across the bridge in the CBD is quite distinct. There's less saturation of higher education in North Sydney, whereas obviously it's the schooling is very densely populated. I think there's only 2 campuses in North Sydney, so that's good for us. The curriculum of Charles Sturt University is very much work-integrated learning, and so being situated next to all of these high-rise services, industries and the tech really suits the courses that we're running. And a big part of the learning will be how do we set the students up with employment at the end. Charles Sturt is really highly ranked with employability after graduation, but with that work-integrated learning, they're going to want internships, placement, nearby. With all universities, we all strive for a sticky campus, is what we call a sticky campus. So you want students to come in, you want students to stay, attend classes mostly, but hang around and use the facilities on campus. that extends outside the campus as well. So Berry Square we've got outside the building. It's a lovely little green space, and we saw what's happening with the growth of more green space and maybe blocking off roads. So it really becomes attractive for students to come and stay, because there's, it's a bit more to do than just sit in a classroom.
Yeah.
And then small businesses, we want them to work locally. It might be gig economy, it might be working as a barista. So there's plenty around. It's probably all of those things. And I think culturally, also North Sydney's quite vibrant.
Yeah.
And so mostly South Asian students for us, but we want them to get involved, and there are a few community organisations that are already reaching out, so we'll get that cultural aspect as well. We'll build on it, but also help.
Yeah. And I think, the big theme here is that connection. It's that, how do you create that connective tissue? And I think, I'm going to make the assumption that students probably want things to do after class. And Victoria, I know that the 24-Hour Commission has been doing a huge amount of work on this, but for me, I think in this space we talk about 24-hour economy, and I think it means a lot of different things to different people. And so it'd be really great to, while you're here, to grab you and sort of say, how does the Commission define 24-hour? And I think to talk a little bit about the broader, because I think people think about 24-hour, it's more pubs, it's more sort of those noisy type of activities that create conflict. And I think particularly in villages and things like that. But I think North Sydney also has a Crow's Nest, for example, is a really great example locally that already has the sort of the DNA and the essence of what could be a really... So I'd really love to sort of pick your brain and get you to define what that means in the broader kind of opportunities.
Well, for us at the office, it is all about extending what it's called, what is the productivity and the activity beyond the traditional business hours into the night. So we focus on, the hours of 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. as that nighttime economy. And it's about diversifying the offering across retail, hospitality, entertainment, wellness, arts and culture, events, festivals. But how do we think a little bit broader as to who are the audiences that we can engage during those times of the nighttime? And I think a wonderful example to imagine what is achievable is Ramadan nights. That's incredible. It's a festival that attracts 1.3 million people, across 4 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks, and it's all focused on a multicultural experience, and it's all about food. It's for families. There's kids everywhere, and it goes, until 2-3 o'clock in the morning. So it's not like the demand is not out there for diverse, interesting, exciting, authentic experiences. I think that's what we want to see more of, and we have such an incredible opportunity to do that. We are the most multicultural city and state in the world, and why not tap into that diversity of storytelling?
And I think that opportunity, Ramadan is a perfect thing to sort of show that economic development isn't just about the transaction. There's a completely different transaction that goes on about increasing celebration and awareness for multicultural community, about food and connection, but also that idea that you've got families coming out later at night, and it isn't just about what we might think. And I think what's interesting for me is also what does those 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. activities mean for a well-functioning city? And I know that you've done a bit in your experience in this sort of space.
Yeah, I think there's another element to the 24-hour economy, which is the behind-the-scenes economy that keeps the city ticking over. And I think best probably defined by staff who work at hospitals. Hospitals run 24 hours a day, and often what we see is people, often grouped in the term essential workers, nurses, people, cleaners in hospitals. They cannot afford to live near where their places of work are. So increasingly we see a separation between where those jobs are, places like Royal North Shore up the road, and the Mater, RPA, St Vincent's, just some around here, Macquarie University, and where they live. And often that's in the southwest of Sydney. if you're working a shift work and you're travelling from somewhere like Padstow in southwest Sydney to your job in Royal North Shore in Artarmon, St Leonard's, there is no way of getting there safely by public transport conveniently at that sort of time. Either the service isn't running, they're not running frequently. And so this idea about the role that something like a metro can play in the 24-hour economy of that care economy, getting people who might be able to live in key worker housing, essential worker housing in places like North Sydney or other stations along the train line, to get them safely and conveniently 24 hours a day to those hospitals to do essential jobs is actually essential for the functioning of an economy. And that's the beauty, again, of the metro, that it can get people to those jobs, but making sure that the right housing is built in the right places to play that kind of behind-the-scenes 24-hour role that is really important for City.
Yeah.
And on that note, it's exactly, we're going right now through a refresh of the 24-hour economy strategy after 3 years of the office functioning. And it's exactly, we're really looking at that nighttime worker and, which is very much, health, emergency services, cleaning service, but also the producers and creators of the going out economy that are actually creating it for consumers to take advantage of. Yeah. So how do we make a more equitable access to transport, to amenities, to the life that and services that those nighttime workers are in need of?
Yeah, and I think also too that just the very nature of those essential workers, they're essentially on shift work. And so they're not able to go and do a simple thing like a grocery shop at the time when necessarily it's open. So is there an opportunity? Or we think about health and well-being. Where is there somewhere they can get a healthy meal at that sort of time, because their clock is completely different? It's that actually, and I think part of the part of the benefit, if there is any, of COVID is that it's completely just thrown up that standardised way of how we should be working and realising that it's completely different. And I think the advantages for these kind of shift workers, these kind of workers that aren't doing the usual 9 to 5, we're starting to think a bit more.
Yeah, completely. And I think, a really good example is the Randwick Health Precinct. We're doing a lot of work through the Uptown program, which I'm sure we'll touch on later, but they're actually looking at arts, culture. How do you embed it more into that caring precinct, the precinct of the heart of Randwick? Yeah. And how do you connect them to businesses and identify opportunities, for that accessibility of those nighttime workers into services and amenities?
And I think, Andrew, in terms of even that idea that, I know that for universities, the cost of living for students now, they're working a lot, certainly a lot more than I was working when I was at university. But that there's that also too, they have to fit work around study or study around work, and those ability for those places like libraries and that to open later. How important is that what you're finding with your students, that they're needing some of those facilities to be opened at sort of the hours after what we would expect being a 5 o'clock close?
Yeah, absolutely. Our classes are mostly 9 to 5.
Yeah.
And so they're coming in and they're probably studying 3 days a week. So there's a bit of time for them to work, and there are visa conditions, but working in the local area where they study is vital to getting to come in the first place and stay on, and then maybe working, because they are working probably long hours in gig economy, barista, whatever. So the more opportunities, the better, and it'll bring a richness, I think, to this area, because it wouldn't just be the same types of employers as well. They'll bring quite differences, I think. So, absolutely vital.
So all those business owners out there watching us tonight, there's going to be a whole heap of keen students who are looking for work. So, there's that, Jeremy.
Yeah, I think it just reinforces as well that need for having those ancillary services, the bars, the restaurants, other uses that when students are staying late or people are working late, that they have all of that. And it's not necessarily a going out entertainment, but it's almost just like the essential amenities. And I used to drive into North Sydney but anywhere between about 11 p.m. and 3 a.m. to print stuff at the old Kinko's, which was down on the corner of Walker Street. No, I can't remember which street it was now. Mount Street maybe. And that was a godsend for us because, well, it had to be. All the students were there to print their assignments for the next day. But it was literally the only thing open. And I think, it's one small frivolous example of actually that essential stuff that needs to be there for people who are studying, who are living in the area, to be able to do what they need to do at any time.
We're all showing our age, aren't we, about printing assignments and that, sorry.
And actually that touches also on the importance of perceptions of safety, travelling from one place to the other, especially with new metro station, and how do you connect that to the rest of the villages, and how do you make that, a welcoming and safe journey, right? Especially thinking about not only students, but from that perspective of women and gender diverse people. How do you make sure that we are thinking of the night, because a lot of them will be working late or studying late, and how do we make sure that we're thinking about the trajectory and the wayfinding and that experience of being safe.
And that can be, like, I know from my own experience, that can be as simple as things being open and people being on the street. Like, I remember my own experience of living within sort of Potts Point area. I would happily walk from Surrey Hills back into King's Cross, Darlinghurst on a Saturday night, Friday night, late at night, because there's people around and I didn't feel safe. But in other areas I've lived, which are more sort of suburban areas, there is no way that I would walk because there was no one around. And so I think that those safety aspects we talk about are really important. But it can be as simple as you've got more people on the street, you've got more people, more things open. And again, that doesn't necessarily mean a type of business. It can be different type of businesses to do that as well. I'm just going to give everyone a little reminder that you do have the QR code there, so don't forget to add your questions. I'm just having a look there. It looks like we've already anticipated a few people's interest of hearing more about 24-hour economy, and certainly, there's a lot in the economic development discussion paper about that, and certainly I know the 24-hour Commission have got a whole heap of resources that are on that if you want to know more. So good to see. So we'll kind of get to those questions in about sort of 10 or so minutes. So keep them coming. Vic, I do want to talk about the Uptown program, because I think your experience cutting across your current role and previous role, you've worked a lot with businesses, and I like that idea of their time poor, so how do we really make it targeted? So I'm really interested to hear about some of those programs that you've had experience in successfully working.
Yeah, well, the Uptown program is a really exciting program because it is very much tapping on that organic growth that is business-led. So the Uptown program is, we call it a district acceleration program. And, it is tapping into that opportunity that exists right now because of the reawakening of local areas, because of flexible working and people actually wanting and demanding more going out experiences where they live, which has created this increase in nighttime businesses opening up. So what Uptown does is encourages collectives of businesses that are in close proximity to each other in a town centre or a village, or even a micro precinct, to come together, to think of a unified vision for their area, understand what are the experiences that are already happening there, what they might want to attract, and work together with a long-term vision to promote the stories of the experiences of that location. And it's incredible when you bring businesses together, what they can do. I've been talking about collaboration is contagious, just seeing what happens with these districts. And just to give you an idea, Brookville Arts District, one of our first precincts that came through, started with 5 businesses coming together, and now that collective represents 100 plus businesses in the area, from breweries to cafes to artist collectives to surfboard makers. It's amazing, what happens when there's a unified vision that is very much business-led. And their, connection with local council and state government, and that support corporate brands wanting to activate the local areas. I'm sure you've heard about YCK, another great example of series of, I think it's 20 small bars within the CBD that are actually defining that area as the small bars, laneways, location to go to.
Just for everyone watching, that's York Clarence King Street in
York, Clarence and Kent.
Kent. Sorry,
Very
York
close.
Clarence and Kent Street is YCK in the city.
But relevant to this conversation, I just want to talk about the what's happening now. There's a few different districts established from Little India and Harris Park to Koreatown, Eastwood, but what we've seen is, for example, Hollywood Quarter and YCK, both within the city of Sydney. They've met because they're collaborating as well as district coordinators and find aligned values in sustainability. And now they are working on a combined grant funding from council to trial waste management and circular economy initiatives that are going beyond what we were enabling in the beginning. So it's really exciting to start to see this collective purchasing, sustainability initiatives, circular economy initiatives, all coming from just enabling this collaboration to happen within precincts.
And giving smaller businesses a collective but bigger voice as well, which I think is really important as well. Andrew, you talk about sort of work integrated learning, and one of the reasons that CSU came to North Sydney. What does that involve, and what I suppose you're the new guy on the block kind of thing, but what are you looking for from businesses to be able to enable those partnerships for that work integrated learning for students?
Yeah, I think providing opportunities for one, but probably recognising what the opportunity is for the business as well. So you'll get quite a skillful group of students who will come in and probably approach you as a business directly and ask for an opportunity. I just ask for them to be open to what that can bring to it's going to be a diversity of people as well to their business. But yeah, it's useful, and work integrated learning isn't just the university reaching out to businesses and saying, hey, give us 5 places and then we allocate it. This is part of the curriculum for students to work out, how do I get a job? How do I approach a business? How have I got to present? What do I talk to them about to get a spot? So it's going to be a really interesting experiment in North Sydney, although probably ACU were doing something similar, but CSU in particular are very big on this work integrated learning. So it's the real life skills with the learnings, and so it'll probably benefit some of the businesses to find some unique people, and certainly benefit our students to find some very impressive businesses around here.
And what's the focus of the sort of study program for the campus here in North Sydney?
Yep.
Is it business kind of more sort of business focused? I know that some other universities will have like a business focus for one of their campuses or something. What does it look like for students wanting to come here, and for businesses who might want to contact you and partner with you?
Yeah, I mean, at the moment we're a startup, so it's very much business, accounting and IT. That's North Sydney for us as well.
Yep.
And so for the next sort of 2 years, we'll focus on bachelor and masters, both with very much work integrated learning. But eventually we'll branch into some allied health. And so we're looking at masters of social work. They'll probably get into some big data courses, which is a bit of business, bit of tech, lots of maths. So primarily to start with, your business and IT, but let's see where we go and how we can grow.
Yeah. And I think from the benefit of having large tertiary institutions, healthcare, these sort of things become these anchors for places, and they're really valuable to have. And I know, Jeremy, the committee, and while not sort of specifically related to North Sydney, but I know the committee's recently released a paper on innovation districts. What's some of the lessons you think, we do have clusters of types of, whether it's that health and education in North Sydney. How can we, from your experience, but also to some of the research the committee's done, what are the things we can leverage to actually really amplify that and to create those agglomerations and those sort of economic benefits, not only for the industry themselves, but that sort of indirect benefit for local business? Yeah,
so innovation districts are, broadly speaking, a kind of a precinct, a district, an area that tend to be anchored by a university, a major hospital, research institutes, etc., where they tend to have a specialisation about a particular issue. It might be things like biomedical technologies, it might be digital technology, it might be climate change research, whatever it might be. And that in turn starts to attract investment, businesses, courses related to that, research related to that, maybe manufacturing, prototyping related to that issue. And it becomes a bit circular. Those precincts then develop a reputation for that. It attracts researchers from interstate and internationally. So it's a bit of an overview of innovation districts. Sydney has several innovation districts at certain levels of maturity around Sydney. Places like Macquarie Park, again, I've referred to a few times. It has a hospital, it has a university, businesses like Cochlear, and others in there. Tech Central, which is a kind of a largely defined area between Camperdown, Everleigh and Surrey Hills, where there's a number of technological and medical sectors. Westmead, Randwick Health Innovation Precinct, that Victoria's mentioned. They all have quite specific functions. North Sydney isn't an innovation district in the same way, but what it is highly connected to that and has the amenity, the connectivity and the concentration of commercial floor space, which a lot of those businesses that might start there spin out. They might come out of research and they need to scale and grow in a commercial district. Somewhere like North Sydney that's connected to where they've come out of, 2 stations away from some hospitals, maybe some partners, some research institutes. Connectivity to them is really important. And so I think it's a question, it's a process of not saying, how do we become an innovation district in North Sydney, but recognising what role can a centre like North Sydney, CBD in particular, play in what's often called the innovation district ecosystem or network of Sydney. Each of them across Sydney have very specific roles. Well-connected centres like North Sydney can play a really important role in that sort of commercial side of it. A business that might be a pharmaceutical business, for instance, might have some clinical trials going on in Westmead or Macquarie Park or RPA, but they actually might need 5 stories of commercial floor space for their Asia Pacific headquarters. It's more likely to be in a CBD like North Sydney or the CBD than it is necessarily in some of those other precincts. And so I think thinking strategically about the role that commercial centres can play in enabling and supporting that broader ecosystem of innovation district activity is really important. I think it kind of goes away from a model of thinking about self-contained innovation districts across the city and actually moving to a model where we see Sydney as an innovation city, which is comprised of centres that collectively create a really important innovation district ecosystem. And that's where I think we're moving towards.
Yeah, and I think that's the importance of not only looking at the local economy as an ecosystem, not only with the centres that are within the LGA, but what's happening because North Sydney is so highly connected. What is happening at St Leonard's, and Royal North Shore? What's happening in Tech Central? What's happening at Randwick? And how does North Sydney become an attractive to almost annex kind of thing to expand? As the Mayor said, North Sydney is an integral part of that corridor. That doesn't mean that the corridor has to have sort of specific places along it. And
they also don't have to all do the same thing. I think one of the challenges with economic development, because it sits within councils specifically, it's a role that is defined in a lot of local councils, an economic development team. It takes different guises at a state or federal level, but local government has a really strong focus on it. But because of that, there's often a need to go, okay, how many of those businesses can we attract to our local area? If you're a local business operating in a metropolitan economy, you pay no attention to local government boundaries. They're irrelevant because there aren't different tax bases. It's not different jurisdictions. They don't exist in terms of the way that businesses think. And so I think it's really important that councils, when planning for their role, the role of their centres, their districts, their precincts, whatever you might want to call them, recognise that they have strengths, but so too do other places. And actually, Sydney will be better off, and therefore so will North Sydney and other LGAs, if we think about it at a whole of city economy perspective rather than having sort of unnecessary district or inter-centre competition, because that doesn't really benefit Sydney, whereas having that view of what can North Sydney's role be in supporting Macquarie Park and Westmead, from a council perspective, you might be thinking, well, that's nothing to do with us, but actually it is, because Sydney needs places like that to enable other places to work, and in aggregate, the city benefits.
And that opportunity for council, as you've all said tonight, about that leadership role around creating partnerships with a Parramatta Council or those other places, which councils always talk to each other anyway, and those sort of things.
That's right.
I'm going to start going to some of the questions because there is a few, so I want to make sure we get to a few of your questions. It looks like that there's a lot of interest, not surprisingly, about 24-hour economy and that after-hours kind of activity. But there's been a lot of questions that have come through about how, that North Sydney has a reputation for being quiet on weekends, and how do we change this and stuff. And I know, Victoria, that the New South Wales government last year introduced new legislation, colloquially known the vibrancy reform, but essentially it was putting in place a whole bunch of governance structures to really encourage sort of these vibrant precincts. One of the ones they talk about was about vibrant coordinated precincts, and I think similar on a different scale, but similar, that coordination. Really interested to know, one, how's it all going? And is there any successful or those precincts that are looking like that they're really booming because and sort of taking on some of these reform parameters?
There's so much going on in that vibrant coordinated districts, and as you mentioned, the vibrancy reforms, which are a set of legislative reforms in order to help cut red tape, to allow for businesses to make it easier for them to trade, but also to trade into the night, to have live music and arts and cultural performances, and really to also help councils activate public space and close streets in a more integrated way and without so many processes. So there's a lot going on in the vibrancy reforms, and it's actually an ongoing initiative. Tranche 1 was what was that went through in December, and part of that is that coordinated precincts. And there's different layers to that across different departments within New South Wales government. With us, with the Office of the 24-Hour Economy, we have the special entertainment precincts, which is one of the examples of this coordinated precinct approach, which is very much working with councils. Councils identify a location that is a good location for really focusing on that arts, cultural and music offering, and identifies it through planning. As special entertainment precinct plan, and it's all about favourable conditions around sound management and trading hours, and allowing for that space to then attract more of those, experience offerings around arts and culture to that location. And we had our first trial of that in Enmore Road, as I'm sure you know. With a lot of learnings through it, but it's been really successful, and now it's become a permanent special entertainment precinct, and the first one. And currently we're just working with councils that are interested in looking and exploring opportunities of having special entertainment precincts in their particular precincts.
Yeah, great. And I know in the discussion paper, I think Enmore is actually used as an example in the discussion paper. I know it well, and I have to say, over the last sort of 12 months, you have seen, I think, the increase and the difference now between sort of that part of Enmore and Enmore Road versus, say, King Street in Newtown, and still very vibrant, but you can see that it's really kind of increased, and there's a lot of people around on weeknights as well.
Yeah, and it's that coordination. Another of the programs that I briefly touch on is called the Purple Flag program, and that's an international accreditation program where precincts are accredited for excellence in what it's called nighttime precinct management, and that brings together police and council and businesses and community and property developers all working together, because all of them are part of the experience of that precinct for consumers, residents, and visitors, right? But usually they're all working in their silos. So through the Purple Flag program, all of these different stakeholders need to come together and look at their precinct and understand what's working, what's not working, and what are the plans towards improving that experience for consumers to keep them vibrant, diverse, but also safe. So that's a really exciting one that we piloted as well across Sydney, including Haldon Street. And we're going to be rolling out in the next year.
Yeah, great. And I know that council, through this current engagement process for the economic development, are really keen to hear from all of you and from the North Sydney community about whether there are areas that could be appropriate that council should consider potentially working with you around some of that, the special precinct, special entertainment precinct. Mentioned Crow's Nest seems to be sort of the obvious choice because there's already a lot of things that are happening in that area. But I know that someone here who's talked about curability and what's the possibility for it to be a special place. There's great businesses. The person who's put in here has called out Morgan's, so shout out to Morgan's there. But they're saying it's dead after 9 p.m. So again, there's those opportunities for potentially a place that might not be the most obvious.
And that's where Uptown, we call it the foundational piece of bringing businesses together to really think about that vision and what businesses want for that area, before engaging in other more complex kind of structures like Purple Flag or special entertainment precincts.
I think if you think about Enmore, you think about Crow's Nest, you think about curability, what they all have is kind of a concentration of people living in and around them as well. So they are successful local centres which have then kind of evolved to attract people from a wider catchment. Enmore has a theatre, so people will travel right across Sydney to that, but they're also travelling because of the restaurants and that nightlife. But a lot of those places are successful during the week because local people want to go there as well. I think Crow's Nest is a great example of that. The square outside the community centre, for instance, on any given night, particularly in summer, kids who've had pizza and eating ice cream and running around after still in school uniform is a great example of it. It works really well for a local community. And that then attracts, you used the term earlier, an authentic place. It is authentic to the people who live and breathe it and love it. And then the shops and the retail and the events reflect that need, and that's what people are then attracted to. And so then that catchment grows wider because people know that it's a great place to be. There tends to be lower vacancies. There are more people there. People attract people. Yeah. And so those centres really are set up to do that. And I know people are, there's concerns about, the densification of centres, around Sydney at the moment. But bringing more people to those places, if it's done well, actually really drives the vibrancy of those places as well, both for locals and visitors alike.
Andrew, there's a question here specifically, so thanks for your question there, that there's a skills shortage in North Sydney, and has the uni sort of thought about sort of this in its choice of programs that they're offering, or what that contribution to that skills shortage that I think North Sydney, but a lot of places are experiencing?
Yes and no. The offerings are probably driven by other factors, including what Charles Sturt Uni wants to run in regional areas, what sells, and what international students, i.e. our customers, want to do. But there is a synergy there, and if there's a skills shortage in the areas that we're kind of providing the skills for, then great. That's our model and our purpose is a lot of students will want to stay, and why not stay in and work in North Sydney, because that's where they're going to hopefully get internships and placements, and our hope is that they will graduate and then stay and work in a business that's next door. So that's why we've sort of set up where we've set up. Yeah. But not necessarily the business is not driven by the skill shortage, but we hope to help it or, work with it. Yeah.
And I think I know that the hospitality industry, for example, is really struggling and so having sort of like a greater concentration of young people who are looking for not necessarily full-time work but more casual work to fit in with some of those essential kind of work, that becomes an advantage as well.
Yeah, and as well as the students, we'll have a staff of between 30 and 50 during the week that want to stay on in North Sydney and go out for dinner and explore some of the area and go to cultural events. So we're also quite a medium-sized business in that the employees will want to stick around and maybe see what the place has to offer.
Yeah, great.
I think it'd be interesting to know what skills are seen to be short in North Sydney. Like I talk about the connectivity and the value of connecting through the metro line to North Sydney. That, you know, aside from probably the Sydney CBD, there's not that many places in the whole of Sydney that are as connected to the whole of Sydney's labour market as North Sydney. And so if those skills are in sort of the professional services, financial services sector or emerging industries, that may actually speak to a skills shortage at a national level. Like there's a number of industries which are growing in Australia and in Sydney where there's just not enough people with those sort of high or novel skills. That's one thing, and that's a challenging thing even for Sydney, let alone North Sydney, to solve. And that's where I guess getting the right pipeline through the university courses, through migration of the right skills, immigration of the right skills. If those skills shortages are in things like the essential services, emergency services, nursing, cleaners, teachers, that's a very different proposition and a very different problem. A lot of that is driven because these areas are so unaffordable for those people, and they're having to move further and further away, sometimes outside of Sydney and commuting in, or just choosing to move to the Central Coast or the Illawarra and work there. And so those skills are lost to the whole of the Sydney economy, and that does really impact on a place like North Sydney where there's a lot of schools that therefore employ a lot of teachers. I'd imagine that there's probably a pretty big skills shortage or the risk of one by virtue of Sydney being too unaffordable for those. Even if you can access the jobs on the metro, if you can't afford to live within about an hour's trip, people are making those choices to move. We did some work last year looking at the cost of Sydney's unaffordability to the Sydney economy, and an estimate of about unaffordability costs the Sydney economy about $10 billion a year, and basically that is lost productivity and lost talent of people going, you know what, I don't want to be here anymore because I can't afford it and I'm too far from my job. So it'd be interesting to see what those skills challenges are.
And actually on that, it's also, it's also affecting artists and creatives. So it's not only essential workers, but, that incredible community of artists and creatives that have such an important role to play in shaping the identity of an area and the experience of an area. So very much that unaffordability.
Yeah, and we're seeing that through the social inclusion as well, is that those connections, those deep connections you create with your communities. If you're travelling an hour to get to work each way, then that ability to have time with your family, but just have time to connect in with your community and contribute to your community becomes a lot harder because, you're even more time poor than what you were before. So I think that there's that flow-on effect for this idea of what is a balance. And I know someone has asked the question about, and it's a topic of conversation that's happening around Sydney with the metro stations, and what impact could this have for a place like Crow's Nest? How can council support a vibrant centre in that area without, how do you create that balance? And I think that's a question that a lot of people are asking, and a lot of people are afraid of, that authenticity that we talk about gets lost because we're trying to do that. So it's a really big, you need people to have vibrant centres, but how do you balance that? Yeah,
but that's why it's so important to trust local businesses to really grow that authenticity on their own. And I think sometimes we forget to empower and enable, as you were saying before, and really let it grow through that grassroots business-led initiative, because that's the only way that it is authentic.
Yeah.
And I think that then helps if you understand what the sort of role of your centres is going to be, and that then shapes the planning and the housing and the density questions, you can be really clear on what the vision and the expectation of somewhere like Crow's Nest is. You can still maintain that and still have more people living in the area because of the need for all the reasons we've talked about, having more people with the right jobs to service the right jobs, to create the activity and the vibrancy in those high streets. But this is a planning question, not an economic development question, so I won't go down too far. But making sure that it's not just about delivering dwellings; it's actually about delivering communities with the right mix of dwellings, the right amenities to make sure that they're the best places they can be to serve as many roles as they can.
And that's the critical piece of coordination,
That's
coordination and planning. And it's not only local council, but it's community, it's business, and it's other levels of government, because that is essential, as you say, to keep it safe and vibrant and balanced.
That's right. I teach a lot of economic development, and I come from a planning background, and people think, well, why is a planner talking about economic development? To me, they're one and the same. I mean, really, planning, and the centres is a physical manifestation of what that local economy looks like, and that local economy responds to who lives there, what their demographic profile is, what the kind of the industry profile is. So the treatment of economic development and strategic planning, to me, need to be done hand in hand, because one impacts the other.
And it's having those spaces to enable that to change and respond to community need, and what does that look like? And I know that there's a couple of co-working spaces that are located within the North Sydney LGA, and what does their business? I'm sure that pre-COVID, they wouldn't have envisaged that their business could be what it was, and they become really important parts of our centres and other things that potentially there. One of the things we haven't talked about, and I'm just going to throw the question out to you all as well, is one of our viewers has asked the question, and I think it's a really important one: how can council attract and leverage tourism as part of the local economy? So I'm happy to throw it to anyone, because I think that there is a massive reminder. It's a big smiling face that's down on the harbour there about what tourism offer, or what is part of the tourism offer. But what, from your experiences in your various kind of roles, how can council leverage that and attract more tourists to zip across the harbour?
I'll kick off. I think it depends on what you are defining as your tourism offer. I think we often think tourism is beaches and the bridge and people doing bridge climb and going on a cruise on the harbour, but tourism is far broader than that. Number of universities here. There's a number of tourists who might be coming to visit their children who are studying as international students, and that has a very different offer. And the role of accommodation, again, the proximity that North Sydney is connected to a whole host of other parts of the city. That's a role. It might not be the tourists coming to visit you, but being here and being a great place to be to come back to for your hotel every night and then go off again. But there's even emerging areas of tourism, things like health tourism. There's a couple of quite major hospitals here. People are increasingly travelling around the world for health, surgery, and it's this burgeoning health tourism sector. I'm not saying that's necessarily what we're focusing on, but the point I'm making is you need to be clear on what your tourism proposition is to then build back from that, rather than just, we want to have people here. Why, who, why are they here, where are they going, I think is important.
And I think we touched on that earlier as well, saying, visitors will follow where locals go. So really focusing on that experience and that authentic experience, and then focus on storytelling. How do we get better at telling us stories of the great things that are beyond the Harbour Bridge and Bondi Beach? And how, because, talking to Destination New South Wales, visitors want that. They want to know where locals go now more than ever before. Even though we used to say that before, now actually it is. It's where, and they'll travel for that. So I think, that coordinated precinct approach, allowing those authentic stories to grow and then being good at storytelling, I think that's going to do a lot.
Yeah. Andrew?
Yeah, it's interesting. Having started working in North Sydney for the last 3 months. I've lived in Sydney for 30 years. Didn't really understand north of the bridge, eastern suburbs.
Yep.
So it is what is the
Yeah.
the area, and a new Luna Park and Kirribilli. I've seen some fireworks there,
Yeah.
but for me, living in Sydney and a tourist, I don't really know what's here.
Yeah.
So I might have come to a restaurant, but
Yeah.
probably explaining what the area has to offer and why you would come is a big deal.
Yeah.
There's a bit of work to do there, I think.
And I think it's that recognition is not just about all international tourists. It's about tourists that living in Sydney that sort of have yet to discover the beauty that is. And I think one of the things from some of the work I've done is we know that, for example, cultural tourists, they're going to spend more money. You know, I think the last time I looked at, which was a few years ago, so don't quote me, but it was like for every dollar spent by general tourists, $4 is spent by cultural tourists. And so they're high worth visitors, and they can be visitors from other parts of Sydney. I think also too we forget that that there is beautiful natural assets here in North Sydney, around the harbour and some beautiful, but also too we know there's some really significant First Nation stories to be told in this area, and I think that then has the added benefit of that identity, that social connection to country, that social connection to story, and who this nation is, and so I think that there's a lot to be gained from that.
Yeah, I think I was going to make just that point. I think that we think about the connection of often North Sydney to the harbour as look at a great place to watch the fireworks, but actually the actual physical connection and that cultural connection to the harbour is really strong. And I think it's either Berry Island or Balls Head, I can't remember, is one of the few remnant stock of bushland on this side of the Harbour Bridge. There is really pre-colonial cultural and biological heritage on a beautiful, really quite peaceful part of the harbour that people often don't see. So that day visitor is a really important part of that story.
Agree. You know, it's that mix of experiences, those natural experiences, the arts and cultural experiences, the unique villages experience. If that opportunity of connecting everything really well and understanding that wayfinding and making it a day trip. What a great opportunity for North Sydney.
And I think that's one of the absolute and very obvious advantages of the metro stations opening up is that it opens this area up to so easy for people to not just stop at the city or Barangaroo, but actually make that extra leap across and to explore what North Sydney has to offer. I think that this panel could be talking all night about this. So I know it is getting close and it is almost 7:30. So I'm going to thank everyone who's been watching us with all your questions. I know we didn't get to all of them. The great thing about Slido is we're able to take a record of those questions, and then myself and SGS, as we're going through, as we continue to build the study, we're able to review these questions and to kind of, there's some great questions in here that really start to spark some additional thinking that we need to go away and do. I'd really like to thank our three panellists, Jeremy, Victoria and Andrew, for joining us. I think such a fantastic discussion, a lot of depth in that discussion, and I think what it demonstrated is that Council does have a really big role to play in terms of its leadership, in terms of setting some clear visions, some clear priorities with business, with community, and enabling business to create those authentic experiences, for community to work with business to create. And I think some great opportunities in terms of just the major institutions like CSU and other universities and hospitals, that there are so many assets. I think that North Sydney someone asked the question about what would it be in 10 years' time, and I think that there is so much opportunity here, and I think that Council in this process is really being bold in setting that step. Importantly, they can't do it without you. So what we're asking people to do is really participate. Particularly, I think we know that businesses are time poor, but we really want to hear from businesses about what you need and what you'd like from Council to help sort of create those opportunities to support you, your centres as well. if you go onto Council's website to Have Your Say page, click on the economic development, you'll be able to grab the discussion paper. There's also a couple of surveys. We do have some online focus group sessions that are available. So if you're interested in joining, and they'll all be online, so you'll be able to stay comfy in your home to be able to do it with us. But to join one of those discussions, please get in contact with Council through the registration, through the Have Your Say, and register for one of those, and we'll get in contact with you. But to everyone, thanks so much for joining us. Thanks to all our panellists. We hope you enjoyed the discussion as much as I think we had having it. So thanks everyone, and good night.